What we're looking at here is some basic pressure testing equipment for swimming pool leak detection. Now, swimming pool leak detection to the average homeowner sounds straightforward enough. Got a leak in the pool, call pool guy, is going to come in and find it. The reality is that finding a leak in a swimming pool is very difficult, and really only the most experienced of pool guys are going to be able to do this in any kind of efficient fashion. Even the most experienced pool guys can have difficulty locating leaks. One of the things that I've encountered throughout my career time and again is pressure testing. When I build a new pool, before I make any permanent commitments like pouring a new concrete deck or anything like that, the swimming pool equipment gets pressure tested. Now, you might ask your pool guy, hey, did you pressure test my equipment? And their answer, oh yeah, absolutely. So here's the difference. In the plumbing industry, if you were to perform a pressure test of some sort of plumbing system, you would likely have the line or the plumbing system charged up to a certain pressure for as much as 24 hours, monitoring for any sort of loss in terms of pressure. In a closed-loop plumbing system, when you inundate air or water to create pressure and isolate that line, it should indefinitely hold that pressure. The reality is that most swimming pool systems leak. The average pressure test that's conducted by a pool guy is going to be, let's say, 10 psi. 10 psi is a pretty round number that a lot of guys will use to test their plumbing systems, and that will be either air or water. Some guys use both, some guys use either or, but ultimately around 10 psi is a really common number to hear. I will often watch a pool guy do a pressure test where he will charge a line to 10 psi. He will look at the gauge for 10 or 15 seconds, give it a tap, make sure that the needle's not stuck anywhere, and then he'll discharge the line, assuming that the line has been checked out okay and verified to not be leaking. The reality is that is woefully insufficient for pressure testing. Now, the regular running pressures of a pool system will be as much as 30 psi. So at the very least, you should be pressure testing to 30 psi. The concern is that testing any sort of system to 30 psi is a dangerous process, and you definitely need to know what you're doing and have proper safety precautions in place to make sure that nobody gets hurt doing it. That being said, the type of pipe that pool is built out of, here's a couple of PVC couplings here. Those couplings represent Schedule 40 PVC pipe. That pipe is rated in excess of 300 psi. So there's no concern for the pipe being able to handle it. What you're concerned about are glue joints. Glue joints should be primed and then glued with the proper PVC glue. And if you miss even the tiniest of portion with the glue, or if you allow the fitting to back off slightly after you put it on, which is very common, then you are almost certainly going to have a leak in that area. It may not be a prevalent leak. You may not lose a ton of water through it, but it is a leak in the system and definitely a flaw to the pool, something that is almost certain to become an issue down the road at some point. So when you pressure test a system, or if you're making inquiries about pressure testing, you need to determine what the pressure is being set at and for what duration it's being monitored. There's many times where I've set pressure test up to sit for 3, 4, 5 hours, and I'll lose a half pound of pressure over that time. And if that's the case, what you would normally do is you get out some soapy water and you would spray down all of your connections, like these areas here, to make sure that maybe my leak tester itself is not having a small leak that could be invalidating the results of the test. And then further to that, if you haven't buried your plumbing lines yet, you would go along and you would spray every place where there's a connection, searching for that leak, ultimately finding the leak, cutting it out, repairing it, allowing that fix to set, and then re-pressure testing the system. So pressure testing is something that is not created equal from one pool company to the next, and the average person out there is not familiar with what the industry standards are and should be for plumbing pressure tests. So let's look at some of the examples here. Here are some common pool items. There's a expandable winterization plug. We've got a threaded winterization plug with a little gasket on it there. These are from the plumbing industry, not too common in the pool industry. These are inflatable, so this little guy here with a bike pump or any sort of pump that takes that kind of connection. This one here will expand even up to this size and bigger, so it's really good for achieving those strange sizes where you don't have a standard plug that will fit your application. Here's a couple of really common pool plugs. You've got this guy here with a standard thread, and you could thread a bottle in here and use this as a makeshift gizmo. Or probably the most common pool plug, it's just a standard plug here. Now, when using Teflon tape and using a threaded plug like this, you can actually get a pretty good seal on a plumbing system, and it's definitely enough that you could do a pressure test. So on the right end, we have what's better for the pressure tests. In the middle, these guys here work great because they work in a lot of different applications, but they don't hold against a lot of pressure. I personally wouldn't want to see 30 psi on any system that was being held in place by these because they'd almost certainly blow out. Now this guy here, I see these all the time used for pressure tests. First of all, this little gasket here, forget about it. It's not sealing anything. The very best bet you could hope with this kind of plug is to put some Teflon on it and to bury it in, and hopefully you can get a seal like that. But you're better off to go with one of these plugs that has a longer thread chase to it, because you'll probably bury that into the fitting before you're getting a true seal. And on the bottom end of the spectrum is unfortunately one of the most commonly used plugs for pressure testing. Those guys that test to 10 psi for a minute or two, this is what they're using. Now, when you tighten this down, if you look on the back side here, there's a little O-ring on the back, and you can just see it poking out at the 12 o'clock position, now at the 3 o'clock position there. That little O-ring, when you tighten this under compression tightness, will just squish out the side, and if you were to be able to see this under pressure, you would see that you've got air leaking through right here, or water if you're doing a water test. This is a winterization plug. It's not suitable for doing pressure tests. Now, there's a very expensive but very high quality set of pressure testing equipment that uses something like this here, or here's a comparable plug to this one. So those two are, for the same application. This guy's here, it's a couple bucks. This guy's going to be like $30, $40 and more. It's very heavy, very high quality. Something like that is going to seal, and you're going to be able to get a good connection such that you don't have to worry about the pressures that you're going at. Still, it's worth mentioning in case anyone is watching this video and thinking, hey, I'm going to give this pressure test a try. If you charge up a return line or a skimmer suction line or something like that to 30 psi with this plug in there, and you go start sticking your face down over the skimmer to see if this thing is leaking, bear in mind, this plug can kill you. 30 psi with your face right in a skimmer and this heavy plug coming at you, not going to be good. When I do pressure tests to higher levels, and I've done pressure tests up to 100 psi, depending on the type of system I'm working on, you need to have proper equipment in place. You need to have things like this would get tied off, so that even if it were to blow free, there would be no physical way that it could come up and hit you or something like that. But even still, face shields, safety glasses, things like that. You can't be safe enough when working around a swimming pool or doing pressure tests. So don't just jump out there and start pressure testing your pool. This information is more for the average pool owner to get a better understanding of the industry and more or less where some of the industry's shortcomings are. As a pressure test for a swimming pool, you'd think it would all be equal from one company to the next, and it's very much not, and you have to be very careful as a swimming pool owner. Now, the type of tester that I use is this guy here. I just make these myself. You can buy ones that go with this style. We'll talk about that in a second. So the style that I use is very easy. Here's one that's a little broken down. So basically, as you see here, you've got the yellow handled valve for isolating the line. This part right here, I would drill and tap or use plumbing fitting to allow me to thread that in with some thread sealant like Teflon tape for a pressure-proof connection. Then I just use some reducer bushings up to a pressure gauge. Now this is a 0 to 30 pressure gauge. 0 to 30 is good because you can monitor smaller pressure losses. Most guys aren't going to go anything over 30 psi. So one that goes to 0 to 30 would be better in that case than one that goes to 0 to 60 because it's going to be harder to read the instrumentation on it to determine if you're actually losing any pressure or not. So all of these fittings here, this is what they look like just dry fit together before I've got any thread sealant or anything like that. So you could just go to any plumbing supply store and pick up these items, bring up this YouTube video, and then you can show them what you're looking for. But basically what you're trying to do is you just need to get yourself a couple of the brass fittings, some brass connector nipples, valve, pressure gauge, and then you're good to go. So again, for the way that I do things, I usually end up cutting into the system because I'm usually redoing the plumbing system anyway, so I don't mind using this style here, where again I would use a connector or I would drill and tap into an existing fitting, and that's how I connect my tester for inundating air or water. I usually use air. Air is my preferred. It all depends on how difficult the leak is that I'm going after. This style here that I was talking about earlier, there's an advantage with this style. It's a lot more money up front than making your own, but instead of cutting into the plumbing system, you would just disconnect something like a valve with a union or any kind of union or anything like that. And this actually sleeves inside the pipe diameter. So you don't really need to worry about, drilling and tapping or gluing in new fittings. This works really great for just sleeving inside. And again, the really high quality of this material allows you to get a really tight seal on that. Again, if this were an inference fit inside of a pipe, for me, I would be tying off stuff like this in case it does blow out or something like that. Maybe you have a failure on your valve and you think you've turned off your air or water supply, and in fact you haven't, and the pressure could creep up over time. Again, this is a dangerous set of tools and a dangerous set of circumstances to work in, but when done properly by a trained professional, it's something that can be done safely with a high degree of success in terms of locating any leaks. As with always, if there's ever any questions, just shoot me out an email or give me a phone call, and I'm usually quite available to talk to people and help them to understand these processes. If you're a pool professional and you're looking to step up your game in terms of pressure testing, again, you can contact me through swimmingpoolsteve.com.